They say the first woman was made from a rib, but what if I told you the real first woman was made from the same dust as man, and then chose exile over submission? Before Eve, before the fall, before the serpent whispered, there was Lilith. Queen of demons to some, symbol of feminine rebellion to others. But her name, Lilith, was almost erased from history. Why did ancient texts hide her? Why was she blamed for killing infants, haunting men's dreams, and seducing the righteous into ruin? And more importantly, what truth were they so afraid she might reveal? In this video, we're diving deep into the untold story of Lilith, Adam's first wife, the one who walked away from Eden rather than kneel. You'll discover her origins as a Mesopotamian wind spirit, how she evolved into a feared succubus in Jewish folklore, and why modern mystics and feminists alike are reclaiming her as a symbol of power. We'll explore the mystery, the myth, the demonology, and the divine defiance that made her unforgettable. Let this be a sanctuary for the silenced, a voice for the erased. And as you listen, I want to hear from you. Was Lilith truly a demon, or was she simply too powerful to control? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Was she wicked or wise? And if this story stirs something in you, like, subscribe, and share, because stories like this deserve to be remembered. Ancient origins, from wind demon to mythic rebel. Long before the garden bloomed in Eden, before Adam drew breath beside a river unnamed, there was a whisper carried by the wind. It came from the dust of Mesopotamia, where gods were born from clay and demons walked in moonlight. The name wasn't yet Lilith. It was Lilitu, a spirit of the air, feared and revered. In the earliest Sumerian and Akkadian tablets, these were beings of mystery, not malice. Female entities who moved with the wind, untethered to any law, neither bride nor beast. They passed through open windows, disturbed the quiet of night, and stirred fear in a world still struggling to name what it didn't understand. Lilitu was not evil. She was untamed. She represented something that no king could chain and no priest could cleanse: unclaimed female power. Her presence blurred the lines between protection and peril, between goddess and demon. Over centuries, the myths began to merge: Lilitu, Lamashtu, Lamia, and from this sacred fog arose a singular name: Lilith. She became not a type, but a person. Not just wind, but purpose. Archaeological finds from Babylon reveal amulets inscribed with her form: a woman with bird-like feet, wings, and a crown, flanked by owls and lions. She is not bowing, she stands, and this posture alone terrified the ancients. In a world that worshipped order, submission, and hierarchy, she symbolized something much more disruptive: autonomy. That is why she had to be recast, not as divine, but as dangerous. Yet this early Lilith bears no mention of Eden, no Adam, no exile. In these ancient stories, she had always existed outside the garden gates, because she had never agreed to enter in the first place. Her danger was not in her actions, but in her refusal to be domesticated. She was not a warning. She was a mirror, a reflection of every woman who dared live by her own fire. Think of how many times in history, women who refused to follow the path laid for them were called unnatural, dangerous, or worse. How society twisted their strength into sin. The same story, told again and again, began with Lilith. But rather than destroy her, these whispers only made her legend deeper. In her, we see the ancient echo of every woman who dared to speak aloud, to live beyond borders, to name herself. And now, as we follow her into Eden, the myth transforms, not because she changed, but because the storytellers did. The position that shook the garden. When Lilith finally entered the Edenic tale, it wasn't through Genesis. It was through the alphabet of Ben Sira, a medieval text written centuries after the Torah. And yet this one text would ripple through centuries of belief, igniting one of the most misunderstood legends in religious folklore. Here, Lilith and Adam are both shaped from the earth, equal in origin, equal in design, not one above the other. No rib, no hierarchy, but equality, it seems, wasn't enough. The story tells of a conflict, one that begins in the most intimate space, but speaks volumes about structure, power, and the unspoken expectations of women. Adam demanded to lead. Lilith asked why. If we were both made from the same dust, why must I be beneath you? Her question wasn't one of pride, but of principle. When her voice was not heard, she did the unthinkable. She spoke the sacred name of God, the ineffable tetragrammaton no human was meant to utter, and with that holy syllable burning on her lips, she vanished. She left not because she was wicked, but because she was unwilling to accept a world where obedience was more valued than dignity. In a time when even angels trembled before divine names, Lilith used that name not to curse, but to liberate. She flew east of Eden to the shores of the Red Sea, where wilderness and wonder met, where exiles became legends. There, the stories say, she found company in spirits, in beings ungoverned, in children not born of man. From her freedom, a new narrative was forged, one soaked not in celebration, but in fear. Because she refused to return, the myth retaliated. 100 of her children would die each day, declared by heaven itself. And if she could not mother in peace, she would become the thing mothers feared most. This wasn't divine justice. It was a spiritual punishment for a woman who said no. How many times has the world rewritten rebellion as wickedness? How often has history condemned the ones who left when others would stay? Lilith's real offense wasn't conflict. It was clarity. She knew what she was, and she wouldn't pretend to be less. And in that moment she didn't fall, she rose. And from that rise came stories twisted into warnings, whispered into lullabies, not to soothe children, but to silence women. The lesson buried here is sacred. To choose oneself is not to destroy love, but to insist that love be real. And in that, Lilith becomes more than a myth. She becomes a mirror once more, asking us what Eden we have stayed in too long, simply because we feared the silence on the outside. Demonizing defiance, from mother to monster. In the centuries that followed her exile, Lilith's story spiraled. She who once flew with wings of resolve was now said to hover over cradles, to steal infants before their names could be spoken. Not because she wanted to hurt, but because that's what stories do to women who walk away. They rewrite them. Amulets began to appear in Jewish homes, etched with the names of 3 angels, Senoi, Sansonoi, and Semangaloth, to keep her at bay. Hung above cribs, tucked beneath pillows, these symbols weren't protections from evil. They were confessions of fear. Fear of losing what we love. Fear of what we can't explain. Fear of the feminine when it no longer says yes. Lilith became the whispered cause of every miscarriage, every stillbirth, every shadow that crossed a mother's face. In a world where medicine was fragile and knowledge scarce, she gave sorrow a name. And in naming her, society found a scapegoat, not for sin, but for grief. And so, Lilith the equal became Lilith the curse. Her image morphed, talons in place of toes, wings twisted like ash, eyes that reflected your worst nightmare. But this was never her reflection. It was society's. She bore not evil, but the burden of being misunderstood. Let us pause and ask, what does it say about a world that turns its first woman into a threat? How often have our cultures done the same? When a woman leads, she is called controlling. When she speaks, she is called loud. When she leaves, she is blamed for all that falls apart. But despite the vilification, despite the thousands of years of being cast in shadow, Lilith endures, not as a villain, but as a voice. Because for every amulet that cursed her, there was someone who saw in her something deeper, a woman who chose pain over pretense, truth over role-play, exile over comfort. And isn't that what true power is? Not the ability to harm, but the strength to walk alone when everyone says stay. Not the desire to destroy, but the will to demand meaning where others demand obedience. This is not the end of her story. It's merely the beginning of her revelation. As we move forward into the next chapter of her myth, we will see how she was shaped into symbols, whispered into warnings, and later claimed as queen by those who no longer feared her name. Now tell me, was Lilith really a danger to children? Or was she a danger to those who wanted children to inherit silence? If her story has stirred something ancient in you, I invite you to leave your thoughts in the comments. Was she darkness? Or simply the shadow cast by a deeper light? And if you believe that no woman should be erased for saying no, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because some names deserve to be remembered, not rebuked. Between wings and claws, Lilith's iconic imagery. She was never meant to be invisible. Even in exile, Lilith left behind shadows that shimmered with meaning. When ancient artists tried to capture her form, what they created was not monstrous, but magnetic. In Mesopotamian tablets, her silhouette stands tall, a woman crowned, flanked by lions, with owl wings stretched wide. She is beauty and danger in equal measure, standing not with shame, but with sovereignty. Her feet end, not in softness, but in talons, sharp as the choices she made. Across cultures, her image morphed, but her essence endured. In Jewish amulets, she is fierce, with flowing hair that dances like fire in wind, her body human, yet laced with mystery. Her wings, a symbol of flight from Eden, are not to flee in fear, but to rise in power. Her association with the owl, a nocturnal predator and watcher of secrets, speaks not only of her connection to night, but to wisdom forbidden, yet desperately needed. This symbolism tells a deeper story. Lilith is not gentle because truth rarely is. She appears in dreams not as comfort, but as confrontation. She is the knocking at the soul when we try to silence parts of ourselves. And yet, her presence is healing, because what is named can no longer control us in silence. She becomes the embodiment of the dark feminine, not evil, but the aspects of womanhood that society has rejected. Power, autonomy, mystery, rage, desire. Imagine a young woman, unsure of her worth, looking into the mirror and seeing not failure, but Lilith, unbowed. Not a monster, but a mirror that reflects strength that had no language. She doesn't offer approval, she offers authenticity. That is the gift of her form, to show that beauty does not mean obedience, and that divinity can wear claws. The lesson here is not to fear the wild within, but to embrace it with reverence. To understand that being whole means embracing the wings as well as the wounds. And that leads us to her most mysterious appearance, not just in art but in cosmic design itself. Lilith and the Tree of Death, Kabbalah's dark mirror. In Jewish mysticism, the Kabbalah, the universe is not chaos. It is a sacred architecture, shaped by 10 divine spheres, the Sephirot, through which God's light flows like living water. But alongside that tree of life, there is another tree, the cliff-oath, the husk, the shadow, the imbalance. It is not evil in the way we think of evil, but rather what happens when divine order is broken or denied. At the root of this tree of death sits Lilith, not as a refugee, but as a queen. She is said to be joined with Samael, the angel of death and poison. Together, they form a cosmic couple, a twisted mirror of the holy union between God's masculine and feminine aspects. Where divine pairings bring life, Lilith and Samael reign over illusion, seduction, and spiritual fragmentation. This isn't mythology for horror, it's theology for the soul. In mystical thought, every light casts a shadow, and every exile hides a seed of redemption. Lilith becomes not a mistake, but a necessity, a guardian of the things we would rather not face: shame, secrecy, shadow, and longing. In some interpretations, she is the dark reflection of Shekinah, the feminine presence of God. Where Shekinah embraces and uplifts, Lilith confronts and awakens. She doesn't destroy the soul. She exposes its fractures so it can heal. In this framework, Lilith is sacred not in spite of her darkness, but because of it. She becomes the gateway for those who must journey through pain, through rebellion, through grief, before they reach peace. She stands as a holy paradox, reminding us that even the divine has a wilderness. That truth isn't only found in light, but in the courage to walk through shadow. Kabbalists say that no soul can ascend unless it has descended. And so Lilith, seated at the root of the underworld, waits not to trap, but to test. She is the question asked at the threshold: will you honor all that you are, even the parts you've been told to silence? And if we pass, it is not by slaying the shadow, but by embracing it with integrity. As we journey now toward her place in more dominant religious traditions, we begin to see not only what was preserved, but what was strategically forgotten. Christianity and Islam. Where did Lilith go? In the sacred texts of Christianity, Lilith's name is almost entirely missing. The book of Genesis begins with Eve, not Lilith. Adam is alone, and then God takes a rib, forms a helper, and the story continues. But one verse stands out. In Isaiah 34:14, within a prophecy of desolation, the Hebrew word Lilith appears. Some translators called it a screech owl. Others, the night creature. But a few, bold and honest, translated it for what it was: Lilith, a spirit of the night, a being known by name. Why was she not included more clearly? Because Lilith represented a challenge to the order being formed, a woman who left instead of obeyed, who demanded to be seen rather than shaped. This was not a figure that could easily be reconciled with a theology built on obedience, hierarchy, and divine authority. And so she became folklore. She slipped into demonology. She was categorized as a succubus, a night temptress, responsible for sinful dreams and secret desires. The church had little space for nuance, and so Lilith became blame made flesh, an unseen threat when men stumbled, a convenient name for passions unexplained. But even when her name disappeared from Scripture, her archetype endured. The untamed woman, the whisper at the edge of faith, the one who stood alone and refused to kneel. In Islamic tradition, the name Lilith is absent. Yet echoes of her can be found in the figure of Al-Qarinah, a female jinn said to accompany individuals from birth to cause nightmares, disturbances, and whispers of temptation. She is blamed for sleep paralysis, for fractured families, for spiritual unrest. Though not identical, the parallels are unmistakable. A feminine force tied to shadow, to intimacy, to motherhood, and to mystery. These figures, Lilith, Al-Karina, the night hag, they remind us of something deep. Cultures create symbols for the things they can't control. And what is less controllable than desire, than feminine power, than a woman who says no? When we remove Lilith from fear and return her to story, we find not just a demon, but a warning. A warning not about her, but about us. About what happens when strength is silenced, when wisdom is hidden, when freedom is feared. And yet, despite erasure, Lilith remains. In shadows, in symbols, in dreams. And now she rises again, not as curse, but as question. What have we exiled in ourselves that deserves to come home? If this touched something in your soul, share your thoughts below. Do you believe the disappearance of Lilith from Scripture was silence or strategy? If you feel her presence echoing in your own journey, like, subscribe and share, because Lilith is more than a myth. She is a mirror, and she is watching still. Lilith in witchcraft and the occult. In the dim-lit corners of forgotten temples and whispered invocations, Lilith never vanished. While tradition buried her beneath warnings and curses, the occult remembered. In the grimoires of medieval magicians, in the spells of hedge witches, and the symbols of esoteric circles, Lilith was not condemned. She was called upon. Where others saw a demon, these mystics saw power unclaimed. A voice not silenced by fear, but sharpened by it. She appears in texts like the Zohar, the Key of Solomon, and Liber Lilith, not as chaos without meaning, but as a force of reckoning. In Luciferianism, Lilith is revered not merely as a succubus or queen of demons, but as the mother of will, the one who walked away from submission to claim sovereignty. For those on the left-hand path, she is not worshipped in blind obedience, but honored as a mirror of internal truth. She is invoked to cut cords, to break chains of shame, to awaken the wild voice within that religion often teaches us to fear. Modern Wiccan and pagan communities have reclaimed her as a dark goddess, an embodiment of the sacred feminine that has been lost through centuries of male-dominated dogma. Rituals in her name are rarely about domination or revenge. They are rites of return. Return to one's body. Return to one's voice. Return to the self before it was molded to fit someone else's shape. The altar is lit not to control her, but to meet her, to let her show what has been buried too long. There are stories from practitioners who call upon Lilith and feel their dreams burn with clarity. Women who had lost their sense of identity find themselves standing straighter, speaking louder. Men who carried generational guilt or suppressed their vulnerability describe visions where Lilith didn't scold them, but stood beside them until they could stand beside themselves. But she's not an easy spirit. To invoke Lilith is to invite truth, and truth always costs something. She may bring unrest before healing, grief before liberation. But the healing she offers is the kind that tears out the rot at the root, so what grows afterward is real. This is her sacred challenge. Will you honor your full self, even the parts you were taught to fear? Will you welcome the pain that births freedom? From the margins of theology to the center of modern spiritual reclamation, Lilith has returned. Not with vengeance, but with clarity. Not to haunt, but to help us reclaim what we lost when we silenced our wildest selves. And this movement is not limited to spiritual seekers alone. Her name now rises in new places, in poems, in protests, in lectures, in art. It echoes in the words of those who refuse to be tamed. Lilith reclaimed. Feminism, resistance, and modern identity. There is something remarkable about a name erased from holy books being sung again in the voices of artists, thinkers, and dreamers. In the 20th and 21st centuries, Lilith's resurrection became symbolic. No longer confined to the shadows of superstition, she stepped into the light as a feminist icon, a metaphor for anyone who has been punished for saying no. Scholars like Judith Plaskow, one of the first Jewish feminists to write theology through a woman's lens, reframed Lilith not as a villain but as a sister. In her powerful midrash, The Coming of Lilith, she imagined a version where Lilith and Eve meet not in conflict but in solidarity. Two women, both shaped by men, both exiled in their own way, finding refuge in each other. This is the new myth being written, one that does not pit women against each other but heals the ancient divide. The Lilith Fair, a groundbreaking music festival in the 1990s created by Sarah McLachlan, gave her name a stage. Artists like Tracy Chapman, Sheryl Crow, and Erykah Badu sang under the banner of a woman once damned. That was not an accident, it was a rebirth. A collective reclaiming of everything Lilith represented: strength, defiance, creativity, and freedom. In modern literature, Lilith walks again, sometimes as a goddess, sometimes as a ghost, but always as an awakening. In film, in fantasy, in music, her name pulses with resonance. Not because she is finally safe, but because she is finally understood. This cultural shift reveals a truth long hidden, that what we demonize often holds the key to what we desire most. Autonomy. Voice, sacred power without permission, and yet the resistance remains. To some, Lilith still represents danger, the danger of a woman who belongs to no one. She is criticized for embodying traits that patriarchy teaches us to mistrust: anger, sexuality, independence. But even that discomfort proves her relevance. She disrupts the silence. She invites confrontation with systems that would rather keep things tidy than just. And so, we arrive at a moment in history where Lilith is more than a legend. She is a movement, a sign that the time has come to rewrite what it means to be whole, to not divide the sacred and the sensual, to not ask women to be palatable to be worthy. She is not soft, but she is true. If you've ever felt erased, unheard, or punished for your strength, her name may be yours too. Lilith does not demand loyalty. She offers a choice: to rise, to walk, to begin again. Lilith versus other female rebels in myth. Lilith is not alone. Across cultures and ages we find women who, like her, were cast out for their courage. Women who were not weak but written that way. One need only look at Pandora of Greek mythology, crafted by gods, blamed for opening the jar that unleashed sorrow into the world. But rarely told is the part where hope also lived in that jar. Was she a fool or a prophet? Then there is Kali, the fierce goddess of destruction in Hinduism. To outsiders she is terrifying, tongue out, garlanded in skulls. But to devotees, she is the one who cuts through illusion, who frees the soul from ego. She is both destroyer and mother, feared not because she is evil, but because she is powerful beyond control. And what of Medusa, the snake-haired Gorgon whose gaze turned men to stone? Her story was long seen as a curse, until modern retellings uncovered her trauma, violated, then punished for surviving. Her serpents were not shameful. They were sacred. Lilith stands beside them, not because she shares their myths, but because she shares their fate. Each was reshaped by the cultures that feared them, twisted from protector to threat. Their stories became weapons to warn others what happens when you step out of line. But in their reclamation we find healing. In speaking their names without fear, we rewrite the ending. These women become more than shadows. They become guides. They teach us that exile is not the end, but the threshold to authenticity. Lilith's power was never about destruction. It was always about choice, the choice to be whole, to be honest, to be holy in the ways the world forgets to honor. And when we name her now, not in fear but in truth, we join a lineage of those who are done being small. Let your voice rise too. If Lilith or any of these figures speak to your own journey, say so. Comment below. Share who you are reclaiming and why. Like this story if it stirred something ancient in you. Subscribe so we can keep awakening what the world tried to silence. Because Lilith isn't just history, she's the future we are finally brave enough to build. She was never meant to disappear. And yet for thousands of years, Lilith's name was pushed to the edges of scripture, cloaked in fear, twisted into legend, and whispered only when darkness fell. But no matter how many times the gatekeepers tried to erase her, she remained, in the ink of ancient texts, in the lullabies spoken low, in the questions no one dared to ask. Who was Adam's first wife? Why did she leave paradise? And what if the real sin was never disobedience, but daring to choose herself? Lilith is not a myth to be feared. She is a mirror we were never meant to look into. The story of Lilith, the queen of demons, the first woman, the forgotten voice, echoes louder now than ever before, because we are finally ready to listen. We are finally brave enough to wonder if what we were taught about darkness was actually about power, about sacred autonomy, about the holy right to say no, even to paradise. When I think of Lilith now, I don't see a demon hovering over cradles. I see a woman standing at the edge of Eden, eyes lifted to the stars, heart steady, wings unfolding not for escape, but for truth. I see the sacred feminine rising from the ashes of misunderstanding, fierce, not cruel. Untamed, not wicked. She is the voice of every woman who was told she was too loud, too bold, too much. She is the guardian of every soul who chose silence over servitude, truth over approval. Her exile was not punishment. It was prophecy. Because some spirits are not made for cages, they are made to carry light into wilderness. We live in a world that still teaches us to fear what we don't understand, to demonize the ones who break the mold. But Lilith reminds us, it's not disobedience to walk away from what no longer honors your truth. It's sacred courage. And maybe that's why her name survived, not because it was protected, but because it refused to die. Like a song buried in stone, her voice rises now, not in vengeance, but in invitation. What would happen if we stopped calling her dangerous and started calling her divine? What might awaken in us if we saw Lilith not as the destroyer of children, but the midwife of change? She who births fire in the soul and teaches us to claim the names we've buried for fear of being cast out. Her story is not just about women, it's about all of us. Anyone who's been silenced, anyone who's been told they were too much, anyone who's ever looked around and thought, this isn't Eden if I have to shrink to stay in it. The truth is, Lilith walks with every soul who dares to choose freedom over comfort, who dares to love themselves enough to leave what no longer honors them. And that truth, that healing truth, is what gives her myth its immortality. If this story has stirred something in you, if it reminded you of your own journey through shadow toward light, if it gave you a name for the strength you once thought was shame, then I invite you to carry it with you. Speak her name without fear, share her story with someone who needs to hear it, and let her be a blessing, not a warning. If you found light in this message, even the flicker of a spark on a dark day, I invite you to support this channel in your own gentle way. Sometimes, it only takes a small breath of kindness to keep a flame alive. A like, a comment, a subscription, they are not just buttons. They are quiet prayers that say, this story matters, keep going. And if this video gave something to your soul, if it helped you see the sacred in the storm, or find peace in the pause, then I invite you, with all my heart, to send a little light back. However you feel led to do so, leave a comment below. Was Lilith a villain, or was she simply too free for the world she was born into? Have you ever felt like her, standing at your own edge of Eden? I would love to read your stories, your thoughts, your truths. Because this is not just a channel, it's a sanctuary, a place where exiled names find home, where forgotten voices rise again, not to scream, but to sing. Thank you for walking this path with me. Your presence, your listening heart, your quiet courage, it means more than words can hold. And as always, with every breath of story I share, I send this blessing to you. May you be bold enough to speak what must be spoken. May you be tender enough to feel what has been hidden. And may you be wild enough to follow the truth, even if it leads you beyond the gates of Eden. Thank you with all my heart.